Howdy, ma'am. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. That forest fire get under control over by you guys?
I need to. Well, there's two now. I mean, there was the one that's sort of near my house. That's the one I was messaging about. But then there's a bigger one that started a few miles southeast, and that one actually closed down a freeway because right next to the freeway. There's evacuations and stuff. So it's probably 15 miles southeast of me.
Wow.
Yeah, we have a lot of people think of San Diego as palm trees and beach and stuff, but we have a lot of mountains, a lot of desert. We have a lot of kindling for these forest fires. It's basically all of California. So wildfires get crazy here, and they just have to start with a spark, cigarette thrown out the window on a freeway. That's a lot of times what they start from. Or one time a hunter got lost, and so he set a signal fire, and that one, I mean, that was one of our, I forget if that was the 2003 or 2007 major fire. There were like over 1,000 homes lost. I think that one even had deaths associated with the fire. So I think he went to jail. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Well, good news, they found him. I mean, there's always.
Yeah.
Well, even people don't think about how strong the winds are out there and the hills. That just the fire can race up those hills.
Yeah. So I'm really close to a massive protected park, and it's just it got green because of all the rain we had earlier this year. So it was just dead for a few years during the drought, but it's green. But now we've been several weeks without rain, so everything's back to being brown. And the firefighters try to keep up with setting controlled burns to get rid of some of that stuff. But
how do they alert you when like when a fire starts and it's approaching towards your home or whatever? Do you guys use like weather radios, or how do you find out about it?
Gosh, I don't even know what for the big ones. I know we stayed home because it was sort of near us. Most of us had to stay home. And as a matter of fact, in 2003, the fires got close to the data center where my servers were, and back then. Let's see, 2003. Back then, we would have been using log shipping to Las Vegas, so San Diego to Las Vegas log shipping, and most of the support staff had fires coming towards their houses because it wasn't just one fire. It was I think it was 3 that year, and they were absolutely major fires. And everyone's like, I can't come into work because all the freeways are closed down. I can't log in. Well, I think we could log in at that point, but we're unknown if we have to evacuate. If we have to evacuate, we can't work on disaster recovery failover,
Wow.
So luckily they ended up stopping the fire before it hit our data center because we wouldn't have had the support staff available to be able to do the failover.
When I used to work in Miami in Hurricane Alley, I was always amazed. That was my first DBA job for a real disaster recovery, and I was just shocked that all the employees had to have bug out bags in the trunk of their car. And if when the hurricane was coming or whatever, management would come grab people by the shoulder. You're on the company plane, go. And I was like,
we had some crazy procedures back at that job. I know that inside the knock they had instructions on what to do, and then there was some kind of plan that they had worked out with. There was a plan to this is just the written out procedures that if there's a problem between the two sides, a fire or whatever it is, you can grab a 4-wheel drive like a motorcycle or grab a quad. And then you were able to avoid certain. They had like a path to take to get. I mean, it was crazy.
Wow.
Now that was many years ago, and that would at least have helped the data get over to Las Vegas for the things that didn't have the sophisticated log shipping. And I'm talking about non-SQL Server products because these old procedures had to do with the older stuff, and you need someone to be able to do the failover. I mean, but for at least if it's SQL Server, and if I'm not available, I die or whatever in some kind of natural disaster, you could get a consultant or Microsoft to do these failovers. I mean, it is not rocket science, but it's knowing the business logic of is there something in the data that has to be changed because the developers hard coded a value on there.
I think the biggest problem is when you need to go do something emergency like a failover and you need to get someone else access to the systems. It's the problem that Erik's running into this week. When you first take a person for the first time, how long does it take them to get working access to a production SQL server?
So far, 3 days.
You're almost there. Maybe 2 more days.
Almost.
It's not for lack of motivation. It's everybody involved wants to get Erik access to these servers, and it's just.
Yeah, it's a hurry up and wait scenario. Everything is really like, we got this. Oh, we don't got that.
And imagine during a real disaster, you get it where half the staff isn't available, everybody's being yanked onto different priorities. it's just a bunch of people sitting around wishing that they could help and they don't have access.
Yeah, I mean, in an emergency, it's probably different just because, all hands are kind of on deck for the emergency. So, like, if it were an emergency, a lot of the sort of complications might get skipped in favor of like an easiest, like a path of least resistance solution where it's like, okay, fine, you log in with this stuff. Here's my computer. It has access. We don't have to deal with this. When it's like, a long-term situation when, there's ISO and other security stuff involved,
standards.
and it's like, no, you have to be screened and fingerprinted, and we're gonna check your butt for illegal contraband, and
yeah, that's probably what's taking the longest is the butt checking.
it is a lot going on in there.
Well, folks, go ahead and put your questions in the questions pane in, go to webinar, and then we'll go ahead and start working through these. We just go first come, first serve, so the earlier you get your question in, the more likely it is that we're going to hit it in the list. We'll ask Richard's first one. Richard says, is there a rule of thumb for a number of rows that would make you want to partition a table? I don't need archiving. I don't need sliding window loads. I just have a 230 million row table with about 45 gigs on disk. Is there some rule of thumb when I should consider partitioning?
Not if you don't need those things.
Yeah.
What would make you think you need it?
Needing sliding windows and archival.
Exactly.
Because it's not going to help for performance. It's going to make things more complicated for you. I just don't see it.
Performance
And
a
how does
little
it?
bit, right? Partition elimination.
Yeah, if you get it, if you're real lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yes.
you would have to use that partition key in order to get that.
Yeah. So if your queries don't match your partitioning key, then it's no good.
Yeah,
for
you're
that.
screwed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Ends up becoming worse instead of better. SQL Server has to reassemble those results again. That's tough. In terms of is that a large table or not either, I don't think it's large for SQL Server anymore. I mean, the rule of thumb for VLDBs was always 1 terabyte or 1 billion rows in a single table. And so in the hundreds of millions, I mean, it feels intimidating, but remember, you're always going to be working with the biggest servers you ever worked with. Your career's always going to progress forward until you have that one accident where you drop tables and drop the database and you temporarily get fired, but then you get another job.
I was okay when I did that.
Now, did you blame it on anybody else? Or?
No. I always raise my hand.
What was the first worst memory where you dropped a table or dropped a database?
Oh goodness, the first. Yeah, it would have been about 2002 or 3 when I just started at Qualcomm, and that's the company that had Las Vegas on DR site, and we did a planned failover to Las Vegas. They do it 1 to 2 times a year, and they were in production out there for a couple of weeks at least. And this was back in SQL Server 2000 days, and so we were using log shipping. And after we were done with the failover, our process was to now drop log shipping and set it back up in the other direction. So what I would do is I would drop the database at the other site because it's in a recovery state, and so I would just drop in and start the resource. No, you don't have to do it that way, but that's what I did, and I accidentally dropped production database, the one we had failed over to, because it was now production. So that, we were in a maintenance window, so it wasn't a huge deal, and it wasn't back then databases weren't that big anyway, but it didn't take me long to do a restore. But that system, that specific database had been online after the failover while we were working on all these other issues with other databases, other applications. So
and it figures that's like the one time that a drop database works on the first try.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, no, you can't do it. Else do it. When it matters, SQL's just like, yeah, go ahead. All yours.
God, it's the same thing with SSMS, letting you click twice slowly on a database name and just rename a database.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate that one. I was like, oh, God.
Some things should be a little harder than that.
It's like bad news. Everyone has to use tilde now. That was the first thing I hit instead of hitting escape.
Yeah.
Let's see here. JH says, what are your thoughts on having one SQL Server VM serving as all 3 dev, test, and prod, and then just use 3 databases, one named dev, one named test, one named with prod, and just use different logins? What do you think about that?
Oh my God, no. This is no. What are you doing? So this is going to be on the same SQL Server instance. You get a QA person who's got elevated access in the dev or in the test environment, and suddenly they've ran this massive query and hogged up all the CPU and memory. I mean, Wow, no.
The
Production is
size of the
production,
box
and
that
that's
would
it.
have to be, yeah, the size of that box would have to be so gigantic for me to be comfortable with all three environments sharing that like it would probably just like outdo any gains you got from it.
And your licensing would suck then at that
Yeah,
point because
oh
you're
yeah.
doing, standard or enterprise on there as opposed to development edition, which is free these days.
I mean, I would
Yeah,
probably
he
like
says
look
it says
into
Jay says it's a VM, so why are they sharing? They
yeah,
have other servers.
the whole
He says
purpose.
says a follow-up, it's very small DBs for one
I don't
specific
care.
team. Yeah.
Prod is
Mm.
prod. Everything else can go on the same box. I don't care. Put dev, test, stage. Well, maybe not a load test environment. Maybe not stage. The ones that should mimic production, but all those other smaller databases that are not prod, throw them on the same server. I don't care about that.
Someone monkeys around with an agent job or something else in there, that's prod affecting too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Richie, I assume that Richie does all the development here and manages all the databases. Even with us as all database administrators, we use separate dev and testing and prod environments, I assume.
Yep, we sure do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we back it
Even
up.
on our NoSQL side, we do that.
Let's see. Next up, Doug says, not Doug Lane, but another Doug, although, hi, Doug Lane, wherever you are. Doug says, currently using OLA scripts to manage backups for about 20 instances of SQL Server. Our operations manager is pushing something else, Unitrends Enterprise Backup. What are your thoughts on native backups versus somebody else's third-party agent stuff?
I don't like it, but I especially don't like the fact that Unitrends Enterprise Backup, I've never even heard of that. I mean, a lot of clients aren't using native backups. Maybe they're using other things, but we've at least heard of the technology that they're using. I've never heard of this. I would say no.
I think it's CA. I think it's Computer Associates. I'm not 100% positive. Like it's one of those mainframey companies.
Yeah, but if no one else is using it in the SQL Server world, or hardly anyone is, and you're not seeing any information out there about it, I would not go that way.
And what are some of the reasons why you don't like third-party backup things that are outside of the DBA instead of native backups?
So at one of my jobs, every few years they would ask, can we move to say net backup for the backups? Don't do native backups because before we were doing native backups and then sweep those to tape with net backup. But they wanted to get rid of the native backups for SQL Server because the Oracle side was using net backup. And so we did this whole proof of concept and stuff, and it worked fine. But as a DBA, I don't want to have to go to some other tool that I'm not even the one managing that software over there. In the companies I'm at, we've got sysadmin teams, we have SQL Server team. Everyone's different. So, do I have to go to a sysadmin to tell them what to select for the restore and point-in-time recovery and all these things? So it just complicates things for DBA when it comes time to do a restore. When it's time to do a restore, that's a very critical task.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, log shippings, makes those things less useful to me because I want access to those log backups. If I need to reinitialize a database mirror or always-on availability groups, those things don't help me very much. So, huge fan of when the folks say, I want to use Unitrends, net backups, whatever. I'm like, sure, go back up the file share where I write my backups
Yes,
to.
exactly.
You can totally use the agent there.
Yeah.
Gordon says, I'm seeing a large difference between page life expectancy on two nodes of a 2-CPU environment. He's got NUMA, so he sees two different tracks for page life expectancy. Shouldn't they be the same?
Gosh, I remember there's an article about this topic that if they are not the same, that there's an issue.
Caius has one about it. We'll have to put in the show notes. But essentially, you can have different workloads happening across the two different nodes. I just wouldn't focus on PLE, and I'd jump out and look at wait stats instead. Because PLE can be in the toilet, and your server may not be waiting on memory, may not be waiting on storage, in other words, reading data pages from a data file. Your PLE can also be fantastic, and yet the server performance can be in the toilet, like you have locking problems or blocking issues. So I just wouldn't use PLE that much anymore. Let's see. Matt says something that's going to be near and dear to Tara. We are going to move from a single SQL server to an availability group. Hey! The new AG servers have more memory and CPU than the old server, but when I'm testing the same query on both environments, the AG servers are 8 seconds slower. Where would I look to see why a query is faster on one server than another?
Who wants to do it?
Erik, you haven't answered a question in a while.
Right.
I mean, there's lots of stuff to look at. The first place I would look is the execution plan.
And what do you look for in the execute? Like how do you compare to execution plans?
Me, oh God, I'm a horrible klutz with that. I always just open stuff up in Plan Explorer. Just look, I don't know. So you can look there. You could let's see. I really thought the AG thing was going straight to Tara.
I know. So did I.
This isn't an issue with the AG. I mean, this isn't an issue with the AG though.
All right. So I would look at settings on there, see if maybe max op or cost threshold is different. But that might show up in the execution plan. Let's see. What else? What else would be good? I don't know.
See what the queries are waiting on. You know, maybe it's waiting on something different on this server than on the other server.
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct is just to check the execution plan.
Yeah, exactly. This sounds like just a bad execution plan. Parameter sniffing issue, but parallelism settings. Maybe check out the wait stats. Not maybe. Do check out the wait stats, but maybe the wait stats is going to show HADR sync commit as a very big waiting time, as compared to system uptime. And if that's the case, maybe the to-sync commits to the other server. If you're using a synchronous commit replica for the AG, maybe it's adding a lot of overhead because you do not have blazing fast storage and blazing fast networking, which those are critical for synchronous commit replicas. So wait stats, and then what is the query waiting on? Look at SP who is active on top of the execution plan stuff.
Or SP Blitz who. SP Blitz was okay too.
I'm just so used to who is active, something so rock solid for so many years, and then this other tool comes along. I don't need to switch to another tool. I like Blitz first. Don't get me wrong. I just for current activity, I'm going to who is active. Yeah. Sorry.
No loyalty.
The loyalty's to the product I've been using all these years.
And Adam Mechanics.
How much does Adam pay you?
In booze. The other thing, of course, is don't forget the obvious thing is different data across the two different servers too. If you haven't restored that AG server in a while. Also, if you wanted to share the plan with other people, I don't know how sensitive the query is, but you can also use paste the plan. If you go to pastetheplan.com, you can paste in your execution plan, and then you can give both of those links in a Stack Overflow question. You can post it on SQL Team, SQL Server Central, and say, hey, help me figure out what the differences are between these execution plans so you can see which one's better or worse. JH asks, I had a developer recently experience deadlocks, and he asked if anything can be done on my end as a database administrator. I played pin the blame on the developer, but is there anything else that I can do in order to make this deadlocks disappear?
Well, Brent, last week you mentioned how deadlocks was like your thing that you needed to work on, or the thing that you're weak on, and then you said that as soon as you get to that deadlock graph, you mentioned that that's where you know what to do. I can't read deadlock graphs.
I mean, there's two parts to it. One is troubleshooting why the deadlock is happening, and then the other part is doing something about it. And the place that I would start is often tables have no indexes. They have like a clustered index and that's it. Imagine the phone book, the white pages of the phone book that Grandpa kept on top of the fridge. Well, if I told you go through the white pages and update everyone whose first name is Brent, you'd end up doing lock across that entire phone book, finding all the Brents and doing the updates. Whereas if you had the right non-clustered index on first name, you'd be able to seek directly to the Brents. You'd be able to know how many rows are going to come back. Some of this is a database administrator's job, assuming that database administrators are the one in the shop fixing the indexes. You can also play around with read committed snapshot isolation. Now, this isn't bulletproof. If two people want to lock the same row, you're still screwed. But if you go to brentozar.com/go/RCSI, as in remote controlled Subaru Impreza, if you go to brentozar.com/go/RCSI, Kendra Little has a great write-up on everything you need to think about, how RCSI makes your database queries faster, and what you need to tell your developers in order to implement RCSI. Start with indexes. RCSI is probably the next level up.
Yeah, that's funny. As a developer, I know very little about deadlocks. I know that when it happens, I go straight to the indexes, right? I mean, and it typically fixes my problem. And in fact, when anything I do new that's greenfield, RCSI is the first thing that's turned on. I mean, any new database, come on, RCSI. And if there's a problem that we need to fix and turn it off, whatever, which I've never happened to me, then we can handle it there. But it's usually a good default to turn on RCSI.
I'd say if you're in a position where, you know, changing the indexes or changing setting like RCSI isn't possible, I would have the developers just build in retry logic, so that if they hit a deadlock, they catch that error and then retry their transaction. Like after like, you know, wait for a second, wait for half a second, and then retry.
Still not fixing a deadlock.
No, but at least you're trying it again, so you're not missing the transaction.
Which may be fine. I mean, in some shops, it's totally okay to just, you know, retry the server behind the scenes. Robert says, are there any drawbacks of RCSI? The big classic one is that some yo-yo begins a transaction on Friday, locks his workstation, and goes home for the weekend, and then TempDB explodes in terms of size. So long-running transactions is the big ugly one. You can learn more about it, though, at brentozar.com/go/RCSI. Got huge write-ups in there. Wilfred says, do you folks have any experience doing cross-database queries in Azure? I assume he means Azure SQLDB. The answer on that is no, because it sucks. You have to predefine your tables on both sides, or on whatever side you're going to do a linked server query to. Like I have to define what the remote table is going to look like as an external data source. And that's just a brittle slowdown for most of my developers. Developers just want to go database name.dbo.table name, and having to predefine the table makes things a little wonky. Kelly asks, with a read-only secondary in an availability group, is there a way to redirect queries back to the primary when the secondary stops responding? In our sandbox environment, some of the mount points for the secondary went down. Not laughing at you, I'm laughing with you. And my read-only connections for my reports went along with it.
It's the read-only routing list, so you have to have that set up to go back to itself if the other replica is down. So it's read-only routing list, and make sure that the read-only routing URL is correct for it.
Is that available in all availability group versions, or is that?
I mean, I don't know about basic availability groups. Well, no, there's no readable secondary, so no. Yeah, yes, it's available since 2012, definitely.
Yeah.
There's no GUI for it, so you know it's easy to miss. Yeah, I missed that when I first set up availability groups 4 years ago, and read-only routing was not working.
The part that sucks is you've got to make sure your developers understand application timeouts too. The connection timeouts may need to be set longer, because if they have short timeouts like 30 seconds, it may take 30 seconds for the connection driver to try the first server that's down and then go retry the second. It also won't fix queries that are in flight. Once the query starts, if all of a sudden the mount points disappear under the secondary, that query is toast. You just have to build in some kind of retry logic, but leave it to the consultants to say, build retry logic into all your application queries.
Oh, it's so easy. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Sure, yeah. Oh, just do it, developer.
Richie,
I've supported entire applications that were built on retry logic, so it can't be that hard.
Right.
It takes time, money, and effort. That's all.
And retrofitting it into an existing application is a nightmare. Is just a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, and typically when you say use retry logic, that is our scenario, right? It's not something we're building new, because the new stuff is probably going to be in the cloud, which already has automatic retries.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, guys.
JH says, do y'all know of any free tools to help develop and troubleshoot triggers?
No.
No.
The delete trigger command? I don't know.
I just saw this hit recently, and I'm going to go look to make sure it's not a joke. Hold on a second.
April 1st.
All right, it had that feel to it. Yeah, so if you go to Amazon, Thomas LaRock put together a book recently, an ebook called The Trouble with Database Triggers. I have not read it, as I had to go look and make sure it wasn't a joke, but it's 15 pages. 15 pages. Okay, well, maybe it might be a starting point then.
It may be a joke. 15 pages. I mean,
15 pages, that sounds real. Okay, that's legit. But I remember writing my first stored procedure, and I remember being a developer and going to the bookstore, and there was actually a book on stored procedures, and I was like, this is awesome. This is fantastic. It's actually harder than it looks. So I thought maybe there was going to be one on triggers, but it's 15 pages.
Aaron Bertrand, though, does have a pretty good talk, I believe, at SQL Bits about triggers that I would recommend if you're getting into the business of triggers. That to give that a watch. It's like an hour, so not the rest of your life.
Somebody said a couple weeks ago, they were like, it's amazing when you guys go and just open the URL on the webcast so we can go see what you're talking about.
Oh, don't search like that.
I know that with the
Don't use the site search. No, I mean, don't use the site search on SQL Bits.
Yeah, no, it's bad. So SQL Bits is a conference where they record all of their sessions, and it's totally available for free. If you go all the way down to the bottom, they have previous sessions and previous speakers. So go to previous speakers, and then look for Aaron with 2 A's first on the list. Look at that. His mother optimized, their parents' father optimized for the SQL Bits list.
I should have just put his name in quotes.
And the 5 ways to write more effective triggers.
There you go.
And then you can download the slide deck or watch the video right there inside the browser. Excellent.
I'd watch the video. Aaron's a handsome fella.
Oh, does it actually have the camera? It does. Wow. Yeah. Look at that.
I think he's in a kilt too, so it's like double your pleasure.
Well, I would play it now, but then we would lose the entire audience, and that would be the end of it. Forget watching these people. We'll just go watch Aaron Bertrand in a kilt. Let's see here. Philip says, do I need to stop replication to do a cumulative update on either server? My assumption is it will pick up and restart and reboot without recreating replication.
That answer is definitely no. You're free to go ahead and install it, and it will pick up again. You should not receive any errors from replication. Usually the errors for replication have to do with somebody manually modifying data on the subscriber, and now a delete isn't working, and so it's causing replication to be in a broken state. So yeah, you're good to go there without doing anything to replication.
Am I the only one who heard Tara say you should never get any errors from replication?
On restore or reboot.
I'm going to print that out.
Or a reboot.
In an availability group, Richard says, in an availability group, do the maintenance tasks move across with availability groups, meaning like updating stats and rebuilding indexes?
Sure do.
Absolutely not. So the only thing that moves over with it when you have a failover of an availability group is those databases. That group has failed over. Only those user databases inside the group has failed over. Nothing else. No system database information. So you're missing jobs, missing linked servers, you're missing server level prints. You're missing a bunch of stuff. And so it's your job as a DBA who has set up availability groups is to understand these and make sure that other server has a copy of those objects. And you could copy those jobs over and have all the jobs check if they're a primary replica, and if they are, then run the job step, the rest of the job step. If they're not, then do no other work. So your job is to copy those jobs over and make them AG aware by having an if statement inside the job steps to check, am I the primary replica? The alternative solution, because people don't like having jobs, if you modify a job on one server, you're going to have to remember to modify the job on the other server. So some companies, they've chosen a third server to be their job scheduler, where their job steps are pointing to the availability group listener name. So it is aware. It is already AG aware. It doesn't matter which node primary.
See, I interpreted that question a little bit differently. I thought he meant if the effects of the jobs went across from one to the other.
Oh, yes, maintenance tasks.
So that's why I said sure do, because I was, I mean, you've been in the spot where you had to turn off index rebuilds altogether with an AG, because it was just making sense.
Yeah, and my client this week, I'm telling them to do that too.
Tell that to everyone, then.
Yeah, well, they're having tons of issues with the rebuilding indexes, and they have an availability group.
Speaking of tons of issues with an availability group, I see a question from a fellow named Jeff.
Man, I was holding Jeff's one to the last, but all right, let's talk about it.
Oh yeah, then do it.
Jeff says, and it sounds like Eric's excited to do this as well. Jeff says, what is the best way to do always-on availability groups with an instance with 6,000 plus databases?
With log shipping.
Do not go there. Do not use availability groups for this many databases.
Talk about the problems with it.
Which one? I'll
with,
start with
yeah,
thread pool. Oh, I didn't know who you were pointing
yeah,
at.
no, you were excited for this
You
question.
had a non-deterministic point. I couldn't help it. I didn't know where that was going. So the main problem that you're going to run into there is keeping all those databases synced up, because the processor that you would need to support 6,000 threads, I don't think has been invented yet. That's just, and you're going to run into all sorts of issues with thread pool. And you're going to, keeping all those databases in sync is going to require worker threads to work on that, and then you're going to have nothing for user queries to run. That'll be tremendously painful. You're looking at breaking that out into probably at least 6 to 8 servers before you would have a manageable amount of thread usage.
The worker thread count is tied into the number of cores in your processor, but you could also override it. There's a setting called max worker threads. Why wouldn't you just change that?
Because when worker threads are constantly context switching like that, you can run into performance issues waiting for a worker thread to pick back up on a query or pick back up on synchronizing a database. So you could lose synchronization process, or it could time out, or you could lose query. Queries would degrade performance-wise waiting to get back on these threads that are spread all around.
To learn more about that, there's a great post by Warwick Rudd on well, it used to be Simple Talk, always on availability groups, what not to do when adding databases, and he goes in detail into the worker thread exhaustion issues. So you said log shipping instead, so what would drive you towards log shipping and why?
The fact that we wrote a couple of stored procedures that do log shipping pretty well at scale like that. So, I mean, just for log shipping in general, it would just be that it takes a lot less from CPU usage and from a performance point of view to back up logs than it does to constantly keep data flowing from one database to another. So you could have even if you just use standard log shipping with log backups, sort of paste not like every job starting every 5 minutes, because that might cause you some issues as well. But if you spackle the jobs so that they kind of start at different times, you could have pretty good luck getting log shipping to work in a reasonable manner. I mean, the 6,000 databases is even pushing it with log shipping for me, but AGs is just off the table immediately.
I'd use log shipping for disaster recovery, and then I'd use a failover cluster instance for the HA portion.
The old FCI and log shipping.
Yeah. If all they're using the AG is for HA, then I would not use log shipping. I'd use log shipping for DR.
Yeah.
We joke around all the time that a lot of times clients will come to us and want advice on high availability and disaster recovery, and sometimes we feel bad saying failover clustering and log shipping because it's such a good default answer. It just works for so many things. Here you go, failover clustering, log shipping. Here you go, failover clustering, log shipping. But it works really well. At 6,000 databases, there is something you still need to be aware of. That's startup time. Startup time can take a long time to make all of the databases available. There's another great post, and I can't remember who this one's by, and it'll take me forever to find it, but it's the order in which databases start up. It's based on the database ID. You can easily run into a scenario where the first hundreds of databases are online, but the last hundreds are not. Let's see. Oh, and I have the page up for SP All Night Log, just because this is what Erik and I have both been working on for the last couple of weeks for a client gig. And I have been continuously singing Lionel Richie for the last month. Just every time I pop open this code. All night long. All night.
So do you owe him royalty rights for naming this All Night Log?
I can only imagine. Especially every time I've sung it. I probably pay me to stop singing it at this point.
I just still see Chris Tucker and Fifth Element. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I go right there.
Yeah, that was me as well. Ruby Rod. Ruby Rod.
I love him so much. Isn't he amazing?
Oh, fantastic. Samantha says, our developers want data from a vendor-supplied app, so it's a third-party app they're not supposed to touch, and they get to it through API calls. In the spirit of collaboration, I let them know we could do availability groups with a read-only replica. And this way, they won't have to wait on the vendor to write new APIs. We can just query their database directly. However, they want to write indexes for their own lookups. Should I do transactional replication instead of an availability group? Should I even do this at all?
I like your thought process. I mean, moving those queries over to another server, so you're not impacting your old TP database where all the important stuff is occurring. But if they need very specific indexes, for their queries that you don't want on that production database, you can't use availability groups. As you know, it's a copy of your database. So, but then you're stuck with transactional replication, and I don't like supporting transactional replication because I supported it for so long, and the troubleshooting is ridiculous, and it takes a long time to set up on a sizable database. Anytime you have to do reinitialize it for whatever reason.
And so, Richie, yeah, go ahead, because I think I know where you're going, and Richie, I'm with you.
Okay, so you have this API that sits in front of a database which the vendor manages, and then you're going to want to get behind that database and write your own queries. So what happens when the new version comes out? They modify the database, and now your application goes because you're reading stuff that's not there. So or stuff that's been added, and now your data has changed, and you haven't realized it because they've changed the key in the background or something crazy like that. If you're willing to jump into that, just know that you're going to have some maintenance stuff that's going to happen with a new release. And you're not going to know what that is because the vendors kept it hidden because it's in a database, and they have to give you the API which they publish. And they probably are not going to give you a schema which they publish, which they probably won't publish to you. So it's tough. If I had to do this, I probably would put my own API in front of it and then manage it that way, as opposed to the developers having access directly to the database, and now I have all these queries going around touching the database, as opposed to like one central point where it's just the API. All I do is change the API and it's done.
Cache it in Mongo, as they say.
Or Elasticsearch. Hey.
Instant technical debt. And then we got like 6 questions. I'm going to rip through the answers really fast just so that we can nail them all before we bail out. Let's see here. Jeff says, don't only active AG replications take worker threads? That's true, but say that a secondary goes down or restarts, and you've been doing index rebuilds over on the primary, immediately all of that data is going to try to flow through to the secondary, and immediately the primary falls over. Michael says, any gotchas with setting up an on-prem linked server to an Azure SQL database? Yes, security. Gotcha on that one. That one's a little tricky. Then where was the one other one? Dag nabbit, there was one. Oh, somebody must have answered it. Hold on a second here. Oh, there was another one that was epic. Oh, what about moving those 6,000 databases to Azure SQL DB? Cha-ching, hello. So remember that you can buy elastic pools of databases and then provision capacity by the pools, but there's no pool for 6,000 databases. So now you're going to have to start micromanaging across all of those. You may save money on staffing, but you may end up spending a whole lot more money on capacity planning and performance management as well.
That goes same for RDS as well, just because RDS has a 30 database per server limit. So what's 6,000 divided by 30?
A lot.
I'm not a math guy, so I don't have an answer.
200? I'm like 200 or
2,000? 2,000 maybe? Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, it's bad. All right. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out with us this week, and we will see you guys next week on Office Hours. Adios.
Bye.